Hello, everyone. Thank you for making the time to come and listen and view my presentation. The presentation that I prepared for today is basically just to, without actually just reading the title, just to give you an overview of supply chain with a major focus on logistics and the automotive environment. So just to give you a bit of background, I've been in the automotive industry this month officially for 18 years. Yeah, I'm very young though. And within those 18 years, I've worked in supply chain, in logistics, in basically operations, after sales, bodybuilding, in various organizations as listed VW. This is where I currently am. I've been with Volvo Trucks, Mercedes-Benz on both passenger cars and commercial, Iveco Trucks and Bus, and UD Trucks. And for a little while, I was at Sasol. So my core, I would say I have done a lot of order to delivery management, logistics planning, inventory optimization, and demand planning. So the whole, let's call it the whole bag when it comes to the movement of vehicles from production to the end. And systems that I've used, I have done SEP, lean methodologies, ISO, as just the background of what I've done in terms of my qualifications. For those who are curious, I started my undergrad in mechanical engineering at TUT. And when I started working, that's when I fell in love with logistics. So then I did my degree in transport and logistics at UNISA, after which I then did a postgrad in business administration at WITS, and recently just completed an international executive leadership development with Gibbs, where I was also awarded the Top Learner Award. So in a nutshell, academically, that's who I am, and also career-wise, and some of the achievements that I would say I've done through some of the roles that I've held. Last year with the ISO 9000 audit, we were awarded a Green Plus. So this one is almost equal to like a gold star in your forehead for preschoolers. For the processes and procedures that we had implemented within the team, and which covered a majority of corrective audit findings and process lack thereof. So in a nutshell, that is who I am. And just to kickstart the process, the presentation, sorry, some fun facts about the South African automotive industry. So in 2024, we produced, by we, I mean, I'm so used to saying, so when I say we, I just mean everybody within the automotive industry, almost 600,000 vehicles. And South Africa is the 20th largest producer of vehicles globally. So we are sort of like the G20 of vehicle production as well. And currently in South Africa, this was a 2025 stat, we've got around 12 million vehicles registered. And with that 600,000 that is produced, majority of it obviously is also exported. And as the industry, we are a major contributor to the GDP. I think the figure is plus minus 5%. And last year, September, we hit a record high of 54,700 vehicles. This is all vehicles, not just passenger vehicle, all vehicles, which this number is equal to a number that was once done, I think, in 2015. So this was just also a sign of recovery for the industry, especially after the whole COVID-19 lockdown and all of the things that came with it. And for that same month, over 38,000 of those vehicles were passenger vehicles. And South Africa, I hope you all know this, it's home to VW, where they make the Polo, which is also supplied globally, all from South Africa. And then you've got Toyota, and not too far from my house, we've got BMW. I can literally walk to BMW from my house, FYI, and also at Nissan. We also have Ford, Isuzu, and Mercedes-Benz as just one of the major, these are just the major OEMs. There's also smaller ones, the Mahindras and the new brands which are coming into the country. So, and also maybe later on, just before the Q&A, if you can tell me what is the number 1,000 linked to a vehicle. That is also one of the fun facts. So getting into the nitty-gritty of logistics. So why is logistics planning critical in automotive? I think just to give a bit of a background, on average, a vehicle takes about 3 to 4 months from order to delivery, depending on obviously what you're ordering. So if you're ordering a very highly customized, it will take longer, and hence why then automotive logistics planning becomes very important, because you are looking at the precision of the supply chain, the impact on the disruptions, the challenges in logistics planning, and also basically the tools that you use within your logistics. So if we're to look into the precision of the supply chain, so within the automotive production, majority of the big plants, they use what is called just-in-time. So within the just-in-time, the plant doesn't want to keep stock of the parts that they're fitting. So therefore, the supplier of the parts needs to supply those parts just in time for manufacturing, meaning that bring it when I need to fit it in, don't bring it a week before or 2 weeks before. And because of that, then it means that everything else which goes into the supply chain needs to be perfect. The producer needs to basically stick to a deadline of when the vehicle will be supplied. Before the vehicle is supplied, the supplier of the parts also has a deadline of when to feed into the production line. The supplier of the parts also has suppliers of their own who need to supply them with the components to make those parts. And if you think of that whole chain, it's not just in South Africa. If you're looking at Toyota, all of the suppliers are not sitting in Durban. You've got majority of their suppliers in Japan. Then you would have another OEM who would have majority of their suppliers maybe in their country of origin, where there's now lead times within the supply chain where, as you can just see in simplified terms, you would have then parts which are flown in, you would have then parts which are the local ones which are driven in, then you would have some which are the big major components which come via sea freight. So with that in mind, there's always the disruptions impact the full production of the vehicle, where a missing component obviously would just not be one, but then it will be missing for the whole production line or something like that, then it means that the whole production can come to a halt because you cannot continue production if you've got missing engines. There's certain components that you can say, we will assemble the vehicle and then once it's parked outside, we will fit it on. So disruptions such as COVID-19 that affected production for some of the OEMs. Then you've got natural disasters that also do affect some of the OEMs. If I can give a local example, recently we had the KZN floods, where some of the suppliers to the plant, besides the plant itself being submerged in water, the suppliers were also experienced the same. So let's say Toyota itself did not have disruptions or did not have any damages, then they would still not have been able to continue with production because their suppliers were affected. So it's always those type of things which need to be considered within the logistics and the planning thereof, especially when it comes to automotive industry. Another recent one, I don't know if most of you are aware of it, the demand for semiconductors in recent, let's call it months, years, with the microchips for the computing, and that has affected some of the production because whoever acquires the mineral for the semiconductors and the production and so there's a lot of things. Sorry, I moved by mistake. So there's a lot of disruptions that can affect the supply chain, and I just wanted to highlight those. And also, then we also have other challenges within the planning where you can have border delay, fuel changes where you would need to go and renegotiate with the transporters. During the renegotiation of the costs, you pray that maybe it does not end up in a strike or something like that. So those challenges also affect how you plan within the supply chain. Within your planning, then now you would have the tools that you use, where you take your demand into consideration, you look into your just-in-time production, you look at where you are sourcing the material and say, how can we mitigate any of the risks that we would encounter? So that will involve having safety stock within your production to say, even though it's just in time, taking into account that this supplier takes 2 months for the parts to be delivered into production, then you would then keep a bit of safety stock, and then making sure that should there be any disruption, at least there is a bit of recovery and mitigating the supply chain disruption. Also, some of the planning that would be done would then be in line with the production and the volume planning to say you experience high number of sales during this month, then you work it backwards to say if the high number of sales are in April and then the April orders come in December, then it means that in December you would ship more, meaning that your logistics would be busy. But in reality, for South Africa, December is our Christmas month. In terms of sales, the sales actually drop. So in reality, what you see on the outside of the supply chain as a consumer does not really match what is actually happening on the logistics side, because the logistics side starts preparing months in advance before the actual production or the delivery to customer happens. Sorry, but my slides are responding a bit slow. There we go. So the flow of goods within supply chain. So as explained, then there would be component sourcing from the supplier. This is where the procurement part comes in, the demand planning comes in, all of that and the scheduling to make sure that the production is actually ready, and from supplier to plant to dealer to customer. As explained, that flow, although currently now, because of the planning, you might walk into a dealership today and find the vehicle that you are looking for. But that does not mean that that vehicle was produced last week or even last month. It could be that it was produced 6 months ago or 3 months ago until the time that it was actually delivered to you. So there's a lot of steps that come into that, and excuse me, various departments that are involved in actually making sure that the goods flow from the supplier to the plant to the dealer and then finally handed over to the customer. So if I were to give you a clearer picture when it comes to the automotive, whether it be vehicles or truck, they follow almost the same thing. You would then have parts coming in, they go into the assembly, those parts are sourced, negotiated, and paid for in collaboration between procurement, finance, and all the departments that get involved. Then the manufacturing plant will then assemble the vehicles, and then whether the vehicles will then move by road or rail or water to wherever they're going to be sold. As I said previously, South Africa produces about 600,000 vehicles per annum, and the majority of those actually end up in Europe and America. So those would then leave via vessels. So that would then be the beginning of then the outbound logistics process, whereby now it's the transportation of the finished goods to the dealerships where the customers will actually then buy them. And then for the local consumption, those would then be moved either by rails or car carriers. Rail used to be very popular, but as a country, we've got our own rail issues. And then the final part of it would then be at the dealer, where they would do a pre-delivery inspection, just making sure that the vehicle that you ordered is the right vehicle that you've ordered, and the one that was delivered matches your order, making sure that basic functionality is there, everything is checked, inspected, and then handed over to you as the customer, depending on whether you request for registration or not. That will also be done as well. And when the vehicle is registered, it would then notify the authorities, and then your vehicle will then become part of the 12 million vehicles that we have in the country. So everything within this flow, there's what I would say governance behind it, where not everything can just be done willy-nilly. When they bring in parts, there's laws and regulation governing which parts you can bring in, how you can bring them in, and besides even just the Incoterms, then there's the taxes and duty payments linked to that. Within the manufacturing, there's also rules as well governing how the manufacturing actually happens. And then also when it comes to the outbound logistics, there's also rules again behind that, the same as in the handover to the customer when it comes to the registration of your vehicle, because we all know you can't drive an unlicensed and unregistered vehicle in the South African roads. So how do they know which vehicle to produce, when to produce? Because we all know if you were to walk into a dealership, you would find something that you are looking for or something similar. So this is when a part of the supply chain that most of you have studied comes in, when there's demand forecasting and KPI alignment. So here, the role of demand forecasting is saying, who is our customer or who is our potential customer, and what could they actually want? So using mathematics, scientific, gut feeling, everything mixed together, they would then say, as an organization, we want to sell so many vehicles. How are we going to sell them? You split them down to models. And then once you've split them down to models, then you say, when are we going to sell them? Whether do we have an actual customer order or not? So there's various aspects that go into that pot, whereby then that would feed back into the whole supply chain. This would then obviously be supported by the KPIs of the organization. Obviously, every business wants to grow. In order for them to grow, then there would be plans of this is how we're going to grow to support the business in being sustainable. And also part of that then would then be looking at the risks to say, as much as this is what we want to sell, this is what we think the customer wants, there needs to be alignment between all of those. And then in terms of capacity, and then sales and operations planning, that's when now you then say, as much as we want to sell, let's say hypothetically, 20,000, is our production capacity enough for us to be able to do that? So there needs to be a cross-functional alignment between production, between procurement, between everybody involved to say, production can only produce so much. How much do we have in stock? So you combine all of that as well to make a reasonable judgment and decision. And then at the end, we then do a scenario modeling for risk mitigation to say, as a business, obviously, if you do not sell, it's a risk on its own. And if you get more orders than what you can meet, that it's a good risk on its own, because it's a good and a bad, because then you are at risk of losing some of the customers who might never even come back. Because if you lose a customer and they go to your competitor, they actually commit themselves for at least another 3 to 5 years, depending on the vehicle. So those are the things that are actually involved within the demand planning. So there's a whole lot of things which are part of the demand planning, but that's essentially how, as an organization, they would align to decide what to order, when to order, how much of it to order, and then just harmonize across all the functions to make sure that all the objectives are met. Because you can decide to order too much of one thing, and that is not profitable for the organization. So the alignment is quite important, and that is where the demand focusing and the KPI alignment comes in within the supply chain. And normally people who would be doing these are people who are very good with systems, Microsoft Excel, or whatever demand software that you'll be doing. People who just love spending time between themselves and a computer. This would be perfect for those people. People actually who are very good with numbers as well, because when you're doing your demand forecasting, you are then looking most of the organization will be maintaining a 2-year rolling, keeping in mind the 5-year strategy. So there's a lot of numbers that are actually taken into consideration when you are doing the demand planning. I'm sorry for that. And after once you've done your demand planning and the production is running, there's then also a part of optimizing your procurement and your supplier reliability. Because at the end of it all, when you're looking at your vehicle, it's a combination of the full supply chain, which starts with procurement, as I said, to say then for global organizations, the strategic supplier selection, you will find that it's done at the headquarters. So if you are looking at VW, that will be done in Germany. And then there would be certain suppliers as part of the strategic planning, which would then be these are local, also taking into consideration, if we still look at South Africa, the tax incentives for having local production, local source, triple BEE points, all of those things. But then at the same time, with all of that, you will then need to have supplier performance management, because we are not just going to put you in the books if you are not performing as per the agreed contract. And also, another part is risk-based procurement. Like I said, there would be, because some of the suppliers are globally, you would maybe have a backup supplier locally, or even have two suppliers supplying the exact same thing from different geolocations, so that if one is actually struck by a tsunami, then the other one probably is in a dry area and they would not be affected by those weather conditions. Or now we have the tariff issues with America. That those are the type of things that when you're doing your procurement risk assessment, you take into consideration and make sure that you have things in place to make sure that at as much as possible, you do not have any disruptions to your supply chain. And then obviously now there's the 4IR, the big data, the AI. That's when now the digital integration of procurement. And to some extent, you also have some producers and suppliers already into blockchain and things like that, where from an OEM point of view, you have a full view of where your part is coming from, how it's produced, how it's sourced, how far it is within the supply chain. You are able to feed through the chain back and forth and then manage the supply of when your demand starts dropping. They know, because then they can also see a glimpse of how your order intake is happening. So big data is actually a huge part when it comes to procurement these days, because now procurement is data driven. I don't think there's an organization which is now working on a gut feeling, because a lot of money is at stake if things go wrong, or you end up with large quantities of a part when you are on your last month of production for that model. So all of those things are taken into consideration. So your contracts, the compliance, because now when it comes to procurement, there's things of looking at child labor, all of those things, the environment, the full end-to-end procurement is becoming very important. And that's when the digital integration of the procurement comes in, where you would be able to do your risk assessment and also your supplier performance assessment. So with that, with the procurement, with the explanation that I've given on the production, there's also basically the synchronization of production with the material availability. So within the production planning, and then the demand forecast, the procurement activities, all basically just comes together, and then it drives how production actually, the assembly is coordinated and the different workstations are managed. So within the automotive, some plants would be running 2, 3 production lines of different models. This is where it becomes critical for them to synchronize, whether it be balancing the workstations. This would be where you would find people like industrial engineers helping, looking at the time study, looking at the balancing the workstation, tech times, ensuring that all the components are available at the right time, the production, and making sure that the production planning is really in line, the inbound of the parts and the outbound is aligned, and scheduling the production. So the coordinated assembly operations, inventory visibility and management, and then the quality and risk reduction. So all in all, this is when everything then just comes together to say, now we have this just-in-time production. As much as the parts are delivered to the plant, are they reaching the station in time? Where is the waste? And when it comes to time, sorry, I moved. When it comes to time, the real-time tracking and tracking and inventory optimization techniques, which help to manage the stock levels at each workstation, ultimately the total of it, managing it within the full production plant. So then the interesting part that most of you have seen is it would be the inbound. If you found yourself around the port where you see the containers coming in, I think on the truck production side, some of you might have seen some trucks driving around with cabs. I think it's about 3 or 4 cabs per truck. So that would then be the inbound transport planning. So the inbound transport planning, that is the heartbeat of the production line, because should anything not be delivered on time, then everything needs to be reshuffled. So this is when the production coordination and scheduling happens, looking at, do we have all the material that we need for the production? Is it going to be delivered in time? Do we have the confirmation? And if we have any disruptions, what transport modes can we switch to? Do we have an alternative supplier that we can send our transporter to go and collect different parts? Risk monitoring and visibility is also important here, because if you do not have visibility of all the parts that you are sourcing, if I can just for an average passenger car vehicle, there is 20,000 components in that vehicle. So that can give you a picture of having visibility of those 20,000 components, to say they need to all be here by Friday when we inline this vehicle. By inlining, meaning that now you would have your chassis that you're going to start with, the engine line would be starting, the body line would be starting. So all of that are taken into account when you are doing your inbound transport planning and deciding how you are going to ship what, but also taking into account the cost as well. Because at the back of your mind, you could be thinking, why not just fly it? So there's certain components which are too big to fly, too heavy to fly, or sometimes it's not even one of those, but it just does not make economical sense to fly that thing. And then you are bringing it by sea transport. Then you need to have good planning to say, how long does it take? What are the lead times that we have? And making sure that your production is not affected. So this is when if there's any risks that you identify within your inbound transportation, this is when now you would say, who is my backup supplier? Can I now go to them for this? What are my contingency strategies? What room do I have? Do I have safety stock for the critical components? Do I have pre-approved transporters who can do milk runs for us or be expedited? So this is also one of very interesting roles to be within the supply chain, especially for the automotive industry, because then if you find yourself in a big organization, you will find there would be a team responsible for certain components, another team responsible for different components. And then there would even just be another team which is responsible maintaining the tracking and visibility of all these parts coming into the supply chain. And then the outbound and planning. The outbound, so inbound is feeding into production. Outbound is delivering to the customer. So after the vehicle is produced, the vehicles will then be put into a storage yard where the manufacturer will decide where their storage yard is, who's responsible for manning the storage yard, around which areas do they put the storage yard, which transport modes are they going to use to move the vehicles there. And as part of that as well, would then be moving the vehicles to the dealers as well. So then as a logistics person within the supply chain, you would then be responsible for scheduling the loads to say, if you are moving them by train, how many vehicles are you moving, going where? If you're moving them by truck, how many vehicles are you moving when? When is the delivery date? And I think within all of this, it's always just keeping in mind the, I don't know, the last time when I was studying, it was the 5 hours of logistics, but I think now they get up to 8, making sure that the right vehicle with for automotive, it would also be the right specification, is at the right place, meaning either at the dealership or wherever you agree to be delivered at the right time and obviously at the right cost. So if you are within the order management side, the costs are important, because if I've ordered a 500,000 vehicle, I'm not expecting to be invoiced 600,000. So also then it would be the transport mode selection that you would be looking into, depending on what the organization uses. If they use rail, then it would then be a decision when the vehicle needs to be moved, you decide, is it rail or road, and then you plan accordingly. And then the last one, which applies to almost every leg of the supply chain, the tracking and the communication, whereby you would then be able to see where your vehicles are, communicate with the carriers to say, where is it, when is it going to be delivered, and all of those factors into your outbound. And then efficient movement from plant to dealer to customer. So this is very interesting, especially if you find yourself working with one of the OEMs. It's come month end, actually this time of the month, that's when the adrenaline kicks in, the stress kicks in, everything is just kicking in, because at the end of the month, you need to make the numbers. You want to be part of the people who are being reported as the top sellers, or you've actually just reached your target. So, like I said, the goal is to deliver the right product in the right quantities at the right time in the right condition, because it doesn't help that you do all of these logistics activities, the transportation, the planning, the dealer coordination, and when you get there, the vehicle is damaged and now you have to fix it. So precise logistics planning, this is when you will find dealers saying, I don't take stock on this day and this day and this day. I want my stock on this day and this day and this day. And that you will then need to take into your planning, because now you then have to say, okay, this one takes on this day, this one doesn't take on this day, the coordination of all of that. And then obviously the documentation and compliance, making sure that the VIN number, we always say VIN number, and people keep saying it's not PIN number, it's not VIN number, because the N is number, but you know what I mean. The vehicle identification number. And I think most of the OEMs now, if you look on the windscreen, you would also find a sticker which is on the inside of the vehicle where you can see that number. That one is very important, because it's the number which then you would use when you go and license your vehicle, when you go and register your vehicle, when you take up insurance for your vehicle. It's the it and all for the vehicle. When they do the micro dotting, that's the same number that is used. So micro dotting is also part of the other compliance that it needs to be done in South Africa before delivering and handing over to the customer. So if already your documentation is incorrect and you've got the incorrect VIN, it means that the person who's going to do the microdotting might end up microdotting the incorrect number onto the vehicle. For those who don't know what microdotting is, that is your homework for today. You can go and find out. And also, some of the vehicles, they already come fitted with trackers. So besides even just you communicating with the carriers, there's also trackers on the vehicles which are deactivated when the vehicle is delivered if you are not buying a tracking subscription from the OEM. So I am almost done. So ensuring consistent flow in high pressure environments. So like I've said, as a logistics person within the supply chain, a disciplined logistics planning is required. Maintaining an operational flow of logistics requires disciplined planning and cross-functional collaboration and continuous monitoring of the supply chain activities. So as much as you can be in the outbound, it doesn't mean that you don't need to know what is happening within production or within the inbound. That's where the cross-functional collaboration happens, because this chain here, it doesn't stop. So as I said, 90 days before the order was placed, before the outbound person can actually be involved, and 30 days before the parts were on water, before they were actually assembled. So that's when the digital tools and the governance comes into play. And within the chain, there's always opportunity for improvement. And that's when the lean principles and communication comes in, where you're looking at how can you optimize your logistics, how can you better support the production and actually the end customer, because consistent logistics planning ensures that production lines are reliably supplied, allowing the manufacturers to maintain daily build because they've got their own KPIs without disruptions. And in inbound planning, helping the vehicles move seamlessly from yards to dealerships and preventing backlog by optimizing transport capacity. And I think this one is almost the last slide. The return. This is not really in terms of supply chain. Obviously, there's the reverse logistics and the return. And when it comes to the automotive world, it's not as complex as on the FMCG, where there would be returning of expired goods, and so the return within the automotive is less complex. But depending on why you're returning it, when you're returning it, because if it's already licensed and registered, that vehicle is now a used vehicle, cannot just come back. But then obviously, then that's just for information purposes, then it would be, you would have to have a reverse logistics process, which then is linked to your inventory and data management, because when the vehicles returned back into stock, then there would then be systems and credits which are performed. And then I think a learning from those returns to say what actually happened, what went wrong, and not really necessarily putting the blame on anyone, but then using this to drive the continuous improvement within the supply chain. So I think on the previous picture, you did see there were covered vehicles. That was probably part of the return process, where a customer complains, and then you then had to change something within your supply chain or logistics processes. And almost there. I keep saying that. Identifying bottlenecks and lead times and quick fixes. So within your logistics, you would always have to look at where do things get stuck? How can you fix the bottlenecks? Is it cross-border delays? So, for example, in the automotive world, during Christmas, you don't want to find yourself transporting vehicles cross-border to the BLNE markets, Botswana, Namibia, Lesotho, and Eswatini, because the priority is not for vehicles during those times. It's people going home for Christmas and the goods such as groceries being transported. The same happens even at ports around October, November. The priority also changes depending on the type of goods that you're bringing in. So planning. That's how you will then, if you identify your bottlenecks, then try to fix them so that it doesn't affect your lead time. And this is where the real-time monitoring and escalation, and then taking the data and using it for future planning. So I don't know where I am with time. This one is my second last slide. I'm just going to run through it quickly. In terms of logistics planning toolkits, I would say for me personally, the lead time mapping has been one of the things that has worked for me, to say in every role that I've been in, is to say, what are the lead time? So you look at your lead, whatever you are moving, whatever you are ordering, whatever you are transporting, whatever you are planning for, lead times are always important, because they are the decider of when do you order and what do you order and what are the quantities that you're going to order because of the lead time. Your risk classifications, where you classify the type of risk you have, how you escalate them, how you solve for them. So the prioritizing, that's when it comes in, the transport mode selection, capacity planning, and also looking at your exceptions and how you handle them. And lastly, end-to-end vehicle production journey. I think I've covered everything to say it starts from global sourcing and inbound logistics, then it gets into manufacturing, then there's quality controls and final inspection, and then the last leg would then be the outbound logistics and customer delivery. And the key takeaways, basically efficient goods flow from supplier to customer is the foundation of success for the automotive industry, where timing, visibility, coordination, and operational performance, effective logistics planning, minimizing the delays and supporting the production line, essentially will end up reducing the cost and maintaining customer delivery commitments. And all of that then just underpins the whole end-to-end supply chain flow, from the global to the local, and whatever that you find as misalignment, you use that as part of your continuous improvements, which would then be information that you collected from your communication and governance. With that said, I am done. Any questions from the people online?
Yes, there is. And thank you so much for sharing and revealing your industry. It has given us great insight on how things move from A to B, as well as how things work. I never knew that there were so many components to a car. For me, the most important is the accelerator, but that's just me being a Joe Burger. So we are going to take 3 questions. So one in the chat and two, well, the other one dropped, and one with someone speaking. So your first question is in regards to inbound. Can we have a practical scenario where a component could not be flown and the ports have their own delays? So what would planning look like should there be no alternative supplier and safety stock is limited?
So if you're looking at inbound, I would say an example would be for a truck gearbox. That thing, even if you try whatever you want to try, you are not going to fly it in. And if you do not have safety stock, unfortunately, for a gearbox, your production stands still. There's no alternative because you need them. So that's when it would be beneficial to have a good production mix. And sorry, is that me?
I'm also trying to find. Okay. I think you should be fine now. I think I found the participant.
Oh, okay. So sometimes when it comes to the inbound, there are certain components that your production is just going to stand still, and somebody will have to answer for it. That's the unfortunate part.
Okay, thank you for that question.
Because of the weight, and if you, depending on where your parts you're sourcing them, you might not even have big planes which would carry even if you wanted to, and the cost as well. The cost, you do not want to then spend, let's say, I don't know how much it would be to fly a gearbox, to fly in one gearbox for 300,000. Already you're taking up the profit. So waiting a week or two then would just be the solution.
Thank you so much for the question. And we have a question from Nelisiwe. Can you please unmute and ask your question?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, and you?
Hello? I'm good. I'm sorry, but I can't join the interface because I was having trouble with my
I'm struggling to hear you,
I
or
only
is
got
it
the
me?
last. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I've been struggling with my network, so I only joined in the last 60 minutes. So I don't know, is there anywhere where I can revisit the whole webinar to say to start afresh with it? Is it recorded? Maybe.
Yes, that is more a question for me, if that's okay, GC. So this session is recorded. It will go on YouTube, and we're also going to send a post-webinar email with the link as well as the presentation.
Okay, no worries. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Moano, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Can you please unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, evening everyone. Yeah, I just want to know if it will be possible for us to contact Mrs. Tshisikhawe. That's my question.
Why?
Maybe for us to get to ask more questions, because you see here the time is limited, and then you find that some of us, we have so many questions, maybe an email or some sort of communication. That's my question. I just want to know if it will be possible for us to get her contact details.
Yes, you can get them, but when you get them, what I would prefer is you either send me an email or send me a text, and then we can agree on an appointment, and then we can then talk and go through your many questions. Don't just call me.
Okay.
If you call me, I'm gonna hang up. So the thing with calls, if I don't know the number, I'll probably just hang up without answering.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think even email is much better.
Okay.
Thank you for your question. Tato, can you please unmute and ask your question? You are the second last person to ask a question.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you very much for the session. My first question is answered, that you're going to share the presentation. Thank you for that. My main question on the second question was safety stock. You mentioned safety stock. Currently, we are sitting with safety stock that we planned. For example, like we build Gautrain buses. We're sitting with engines that now we cannot resell. If you want to resell, they want to give you the lowest price. How do you handle your safety stock? And how do you manage Sorry.
Safety stock is, there's a level of gut feeling. So the business needs to say, this is the risk that we are willing to take. And then you agree on that risk. Because it's the same as even if you were in the warehouse or with aftermarket parts, there needs to be a risk appetite level that as an organization you are willing to keep in terms so that when it comes to times like this, you are willing to write them off. Because if nobody's willing to buy your stock, you get to a point of saying, let's write it off and sell it at the lowest price that we can get. So it's the same as if you were working for a mayonnaise company and after December, no stock fell wants to buy your mayonnaise. You would then need to make a decision to say, well, it's going to expire in 2 weeks' time. What shall we do? Because that safety stock, the longer you keep it in inventory, it's depreciating. But then on your side, you might have to do the storage cost, all of the costs associated with you keeping that safety stock might not be worth you keeping it much longer. Rather sell it and make a loss and move on.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for
1
your
minute
question,
left.
Tato. And yes, 1 minute left. Lozi, you may unmute and ask your short question.
Okay, yeah, I think we've got such a very tight time constraint. My question is more towards cost, and I don't know if it will be answered in this limited time that we have. So let me rather send you an email. I think I would appreciate that, because essentially everything that all the steps in terms of the supply chain and all the risk assessments, everything is connected and integrated through costs that are involved. And yeah, I just had a lengthy question, and I don't think it'll meet this deadline.
Okay, it's fine. Then we can take one last quick one. I think what's not go you can pronounce it.
Protocol.
Yes, please ask your question.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to ask us just a small thing. What could be our do's and don'ts on the supply chain?
Which part of the supply chain?
In an alcohol side, like SAB breweries.
Well, besides the legal and the company, it's really it's really a combination of those two. So for every organization, the do's and don'ts, you are governed by what does the law say and what does the organizational rules say. And
Okay.
that's how you drive your supply chain. Because if you get to a point of SAB saying Easter is coming, we are deciding to not produce as much as we would have last year, there's nothing you can do. If the bosses say you're not going to do it, you're not going to do it, even though you know by Easter a lot of people will be drunk. So the do's and the don'ts are governed by what does the country say and what does the boss say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that answers.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining the webinar. And thank you so much, Tshisikhawe. It was a great session into your industry. And I'm hoping that others pivot their career and join your industry so that you have more colleagues. And once again, thank you, everyone, for your time. And yeah, keep watch on the IQ Academy webinar section for any webinars that we may host in the future. We host 2 every month, and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you so much, everyone.